mind control going on. The signals broadcast 24 hours a day. All this media just become aware of it, and they'll say there's nothing going on. And I want to say, put on these glasses or start chewing concrete.
The rich and the powerful, and they have blinded us to the truth.
The question is, do we all work for central bankers? That's what I want to address to our guest tonight.
Our impulses are being redirected. We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep.
An estimated 50 to 70 million Americans suffer from a sleep disorder or sleep deprivation.
Whenever you meet a ghost, don't run away. Because the ghost will capture the substance of your fear and materialize itself out of your own substance and will kill you.
The census numbers show the United States has the biggest gap between rich and poor compared to all westernized countries today.
Our projections show us above the year.
Ruins have been uncovered in Argentina, but they're not from an ancient civilization. They're reportedly connected with the Nazi regime. According to an article in the New Zealand Herald, a secret bunker was found which appears to have been planned for members of the Nazi Party to use as a hideout after losing the war and fleeing to South America.
Greetings, citizens. Bilderberg founder Prince Bernhard got the Enigma machines decoded Nazi communications made possible by Alan Turning's invention of the computer. He gave these communications back to the Nazis so they could lay traps for the Allies.
Okay, so this is question number 2. Who gave permission for a former SS officer to help plan Market Garden? And of course, I'm sure you all know who that is here on the right. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, making it very clear to history that he was looking over the shoulders of Montgomery and Horrocks.
Netherlands Prince Bernhard was given instant access via naval intelligence officer Ian Fleming on orders of Churchill. Fleming and the Navy at large sensed Bernhard's Nazi leanings and restricted all access to the Navy. But Bernhard, by right of royalty and backing by England's Wall Street, Downing Street, was untouchable.
Ian Fleming was in naval intelligence in the Second World War, the famous Bond writer, and here he is. Interestingly though, he was told by the King to sign the certificate. He was told by Churchill, Bernhard is trustworthy, we can have him in the team. But you know what, he wouldn't sign the pass for the Royal Navy.
Prince Bernhard also protected Christian Lindman, a traitor who went by King Conradso, at the detriment of many Allied units.
Warrant here for a man called Lindman's Christians. We want to interrogate him. Oh, I said, you can't interrogate him. He's the head of the King Conradso. He's one of the top patriots in our country. He said, nevertheless, we wish to interrogate him. And they said, no, you will have to have a much more higher arrest warrant than this. And it will have to be with a counter stamp of the Netherlands. You've got a British one. You're in Holland now and you will need this. So he said, right, we'll get it. So they left. And it took them a day to get it. Following morning, he went back, Colonel Pinto, with his number 2, with a properly filled in warrant for the arrest. And when they went in, they said, well, it's terribly sorry, it's late, he's gone on a mission.
Officer Pinto pressed action with evidence against the betrayers but was instead reprimanded. All records and evidence are destroyed. Trials initiated by what information had been released were delayed indefinitely.
After his outburst to senior officers at Dutch intelligence headquarters, and despite his rank of colonel, old Pinto had all of his staff removed, all of his translators and his translator when this happened. So the guy's just completely stripped of all his ability to do his job.
A later Bilderberg chair Lord Peter Carrington was also a co-conspirator for the Nazis in World War II. Carrington provided Nazis maps of Allied defense and he killed the advance as an officer when it was the obvious British move bought at great cost. Instead, Carrington left the tank divisions behind as Nazis swept in. He was also aided by corrupted Officer Browning.
Those are British troops at Arnhem. They're hurt, bad. You're not gonna stop. Not now.
I'm sorry, we have our orders.
We busted our asses getting here, half my men are killed, and you're just gonna stop? And drink tea?
After the Brits were shut down, the Americans saw these sitting tanks and said, fuck it, we understand Sherman tanks. Well, ride to victory, but Lord Carrington shut them down too.
So this is what the Americans proposed. They said, okay, we'll jump on your tanks and we'll go. But no, Carrington was having none of that. And here is Carrington in the 1980s when he was the Defence Secretary and then Foreign Secretary. He was Defence Secretary for Edward Heath, Foreign Secretary for Margaret Thatcher. And then, of course, he went on to NATO, become Secretary General of NATO, and in the 1990s, for I think it was 5-6 years, the chairman of the Bilderberg.
These steps were coordinated by German industrialists, with these bought men the most prominent of those companies we now know as Bayer Santo. These German industrialists moved to America while the war was going on, long before the official Operation Paperclip was enacted by the CIA, an intelligence agency which in turn the Bilderbergs created for what we now call the Deep State.
And many of those industrialists had already many subsidiary companies in foreign countries, so they were just moving all the wealth from bank accounts into other countries, but they were doing deals, and they had a lot of chips to do those deals with. One of the most important ones, of course, is the loot of the whole of Europe. Right, so they've been going through the bank vaults all over Europe, taking all the money. They've been going through people's houses, picking up any kind of loot wealth. There's bearer bonds, which were a major currency, which is a kind of share certificate, which is like money. So, say I've got, I don't know, £100,000 worth of shares in Shell, I can give you that certificate, and that's £100,000 cash, basically. So the bearer bonds were an important part of the wealth the Nazis had. So this was the final signing off on the agreement across Nazi Germany for them to survive the war. Well, and it's not just me saying this. Here's the American intelligence report all about it. Plans of the German industrialists to engage in underground activity after Germany's defeat, the flow of capital to neutral countries.
All this fuckery extended the war 5 months longer to provide time to make the SS the business leaders of tomorrow with laundered money. Jews were also put on those boards to hide the SS better.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take all this Nazi loot and we're going to use it and secrete it around to these nice businesses. If you go back to the previous slide about Bormann, his plan, in fact this is what he did, is he created 750 corporations, and into those corporations after the war, he got all the SS people and he said, take off your SS uniform, put on a nice suit, we're going to make you on the board of directors of this company. And the money was laundered through Sullivan and Cromwell, mostly, was laundered through Sullivan and Cromwell, the Dulles brothers law firm.
So as the Bilderbergs ran the world and the SS ran the leading businesses, despite Hitler's supposed death and heavy casualties, the Nazis came our victors after all. After the Nuremberg trials, the lawyers who laundered the money for the SS became State Department and CIA officials.
That's his wife. 1946 Nuremberg tribunals, and this is the proof that he was there, right? And now we've got more proof as well. He's not making this up. A German general declared to his face, yes, you have beaten us for the second time. This is at Nuremberg, right? And this guy was he was escorting the prisoners at Nuremberg. Yes, you have beaten us for the second time, but next time we will win. Next time it will all take place so slowly you won't know what's happening until it's all over.
25 years after the war, history was rewritten about the Lineman affair, stating nothing occurred, no need to think about it. But in 1952, books by Caputo in Pinto details the actual findings before he died and his operation was shut down.
And so he became a successful author after he got the Spycatcher book published in 1952.
The next year, Bernhard makes the Nazi transition of power official with the CIA Operation Paperclip, and in 1954 the Bilderbergs take their first annual meeting with him as chair to secretly run the governments of the world.
The original conference was held at the Hotel de Bilderberg in Oosterbeek, Netherlands, from 29 to May 31, 1954.
The Bilderberg Group's unofficial headquarters is the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. They keep it unofficial so the professors of the University of Leiden can shill for the Bilderbergs, though they do not disclose that they are in part hired for that service, like this professor on the history of diplomacy at the University of Leiden on Al Jazeera.
You mentioned that there were important gains that could be made out of these informal meetings. I just, for our viewers who are not familiar with the Bilderberg Group, just how influential is this group? And are they concrete examples of, of how they've changed or shifted global policy?
Yes, I mean, there are various ways of assessing influence, of course.
After shadow building the EU, NATO and running the world in shadows, CIA Walter Seal chairs to direct the formed Trilateral Commission. Since its 1973 inception, the Trilateral permanently set themselves in the control position of upper US government.
International and intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateralist Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical.
Because of Seal's initial movement in counterintelligence to misinform America while her republic was forcefully and finally privatized under President Carter, Carter himself tied into the Trilateral Commission like Bush, Clinton and Obama, there is scant information you'll find on this shadow mover conducting their through shadow policies in the Bilderbergs, while Trilateral Commission founders Benous Brzezinski created with the CIA, Al-Qaeda and the armed Taliban to close the Russian-Afghanistan border was conservative leader Alec Douglas Home. His previous vocation as Prime Minister gave Alec Douglas Home all the contacts he needed for successful privatization of shadow warfare.
At the White House in Washington, the start of a two-day summit conference between President Johnson and British Prime Minister Sir Alec Douglas Home.
After ushering the direction of American policy through previous Trilateral member Bush to put in check the nationalism of Reagan, Bilderberg Chair Eric Roll took over. Peter Carrington directed world policy through the weapons arm of the banksters, NATO. He split NATO into two propaganda groups: terrorist propaganda for the right and ecology propaganda for the left, both with the end goal of globalism.
Well, won't you please be seated? I know that here we have the NATO ambassadors, we have some members of our Congress, other guests, and Peter, and Lady Carrington, we're all here today to honor you on the occasion of your final visit to the United States as NATO Secretary General. You've done a magnificent job at NATO. Your efforts on behalf of all of us during the past 4 years have set a new standard. But we're recognizing something more than simply 4 years of a job well done. Your stewardship of the Alliance has continued a life's work in support of human decency and the ideal of freedom, the very basis of the compact for peace that we call NATO.
Then as Trilateral CIA leader Bush Sr. took over, Peter Carrington, the 6th Baron Carrington, took up as Bilderberg chair, setting up the false choice of Clinton, a fellow agent in the Trilateral Commission, to continue the New World Order from the rhetoric of the opposing party. After Carrington stepped down as chair, he was replaced by Ishine Devignan, ruling the Bilderbergs for most of our modern era.
it's the most powerful lobby in the whole of the Western world, really. It's rooted in NATO and in the NATO countries, and the effect of it is said to be making a difference between war and peace. This is something that was told me by one of the German researchers who was over there, a guy called Klaus Kopf. And people have been working on this in their own ways right across the world, particularly the Western world, since the mid-1990s, when this first came out to the public. I mean, when I first came across them, there was a bit of criticism online. This is kind of the early days of the internet, really, but most of it was came from a kind of anti-Semitic point of view, saying this is a Jewish conspiracy, blah blah blah, and there was very little, a little bit, but not much, and which was balanced and sensible. So I looked at this, I grappled with this back in 1996. I thought we've really got to make sure the basic facts are out there about the origins of Bilderberg, with Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, the former SS officer that chaired these conferences from 1954 till 1975, when he was discredited, and also with the lists, simply a list of who the Bilderberg say is there, because we know for sure, for example with Tony Blair, that people have been going to these meetings without them being on the official list. But in order to start your research, you've got to start with all this basic information, which is what I put on the internet 20 years ago this year, really, and that was the foundation of Bilderberg.org.
Right. And so now, given your years of experience of researching, what do you see coming out of this most recent gathering? What are
These are the high priests of globalization. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.